We've begun to explore unintentional killings that are treated as criminal homicides. So we recognize that unintentional killings can be classified generally into three groupings: killings that result from ordinary negligence, from gross negligence, and from extreme recklessness, or what we call depraved heart. So far, we focused on those acts that are deemed grossly negligent, that cause a death. We know that this conduct can be grounds for civil liability under tort law, and at the same time, it might produce criminal liability under involuntary manslaughter. Let's now turn our attention to the most extreme behavior, which satisfies the mens rea of malice for murder too. We call it depraved heart murder for short. As you're going to recall, depraved heart murder is one of the four mens rea for malice for murder too. Depraved heart means the measure of implied malice because it's behavior that demonstrates a callous disregard for human life. And that's the subject of our lecture today. When is behavior so wanton, so extremely reckless, that we consider it man-endangering for murder too? And when is that behavior less egregious, so that it's only involuntary manslaughter? I want to consider two examples that involve firing of guns without any intent to kill. In the first example, Sam decides to enjoy some target practice with a bullseye mark that he sets up in a wooded area within the county limits. So he sets it all up, walks back a pace, and now he's going to fire into the bullseye. In the second example, John is setting up a target practice all right, but he's using a moving train as his target. There he's sitting on the side of the hill, and he's going to get ready to fire at that moving target. Neither should be firing a gun where they're doing it. So let's follow these examples through in their stories to see what happens. In the first example, just as Sam takes aim to fire at the target, a troop of brownies walks right in front of the target, and Sam kills one before he even knows what's happened. In the second example, there's John sitting on the side of an embankment. He's watching the moving train go by in the valley below, and he fires his gun directly at the train, just for the thrill of it. No intent to kill somebody, but he does kill someone on the train. Sam firing at the bullseye, John firing at a moving train. Both are firing guns when they shouldn't have been. Which one feels to you like involuntary manslaughter under a theory of gross negligence? And which one feels more egregious to warrant murder too through a theory of depraved heart? I'm guessing, but I suspect this was an easy question for you to answer. Even without knowing all the elements for murder too under a theory of depraved heart, you intuitively understood that taking pot shots at a moving train shows more callous behavior than firing improperly at a bullseye target. In the case of Sam, who set up his target practice in the woods, he engaged in behavior he knew or should have known had a substantial and unjustifiable risk of death or serious bodily harm. Although the likelihood of hitting someone in a wooded area might have been low, the magnitude of that harm was extremely high if he did hit someone. But John shooting at a moving train just for the thrill of it is quantitatively different. The risk that John is running is so abhorrent to society, and the activity he is performing has no socially redeeming value. This kind of conduct is callous. It shows his complete disregard for the safety of others. One could argue that shooting at a traditional target, that bullseye, albeit doing it very badly, should be criminalized. But it's not abhorrent behavior like taking pot shots at a train, which should be criminalized more severely. To hold John responsible for murder too, finding malice under the theory of depraved heart, let's look at the law. Depraved heart murder, which is one way to prove murder too, requires that the prosecution prove three elements. The first element is that an average person knows that the behavior endangers human life in general. This is what we're going to call the objective test. An average person would know it. In looking at John shooting at a moving train, would an average person sitting on that embankment understand that this behavior is extremely dangerous, that it endangers those around John? I think the answer is, of course, yes. Second, we need to ask whether the conduct of shooting at a moving train is base antisocial, or that defendant has a base antisocial motive in committing it. This element, base antisocial behavior or motive, is critical to establish murder too. that the act has no socially redeeming value, and by doing it, it shows defendant's callousness and his complete lack of care for his fellow citizens. It's one of the keys that separates a person being guilty of manslaughter and a person who's convicted of murder for an unintentional killing. How base, how antisocial was the behavior or the motive behind it? How do you spot base antisocial behavior? I sort of think of it this way. If I ran the desert island, that's my code for saying if I were in charge of the state legislature, would I ban this behavior because it has no place in a civilized society? Here, if I ran that desert island, I would say there's no place in a civilized society for someone to shoot at a moving train just for the thrill of it, just because he could. That's element number 2. The third element that has to be proven is that defendant himself knows that this conduct endangers human life in general. This is the subjective test. It's not enough that average people know that the conduct is dangerous. Prosecution also has to prove that defendant understands the gravity of the risk of that harm to which he is exposing others. Did John understand that he endangered others, that there was a risk that somebody could die? It doesn't mean somebody's going to die, just about the risk that somebody could die. When you look at all 3 elements, when you step back and look at them, you see that there's an objective test built in, average people recognizing that the conduct endangers human life, and there's built in a subjective test that this defendant knew that this conduct endangered human life. And then sandwiched in between, we have to figure out if that conduct either was base antisocial behavior or it was done with a base antisocial motive. All 3 elements have to be proven for it to be murder 2. If one element is missing, then the crime can't be murder 2 under depraved heart.